Hi, Rich Templeton here once again. Got the lovely Ashley Collins. Thank you again for joining us.
Yeah.
Today we're going to look at hurdles again, but this time it's hurdles getting into some sort of financial arrangement.
Right.
Things with the company, things with the individual, other agreements or arrangements, things that might inhibit. Sometimes those can sneak up on us, whether you're buying a car, buying a house, in this case, maybe leasing a trailer, getting into a factoring program, things of that nature. So that's the kinds of things we wanted to talk about today. You prepared with some knowledge on us?
I have some good stuff for you.
So I know criminal history.
Right.
I know that can be one thing that can cause some sort of hurdle. So let's talk about that.
So criminal history, an explanation goes a really long way. If you can explain in a feasible kind of manner what happened, I was 16 at the time, I made a mistake, it's been 10 years, everything is fine, I haven't had any record or anything from then, generally that's fine. It's if it's been really recent, that causes a little bit more of an issue, especially if it's for charges like significant theft or fraud. But generally, most things we can work around, and you'd be surprised. Our parameters are changing all the time.
Sure.
We don't have hard lines on anybody, and like I said, we really consider everybody as an individual, what they've gone through, and how that pertained to what occurred back then.
Sure. And now, obviously, you as the underwriter here at Steelhead Finance, you're talking more specifically to Steelhead. Now, when it comes to other financial arrangements, these might be somewhat of a boxed parameters, but every situation is going to be different. Every factoring company is going to be different to some degree.
Right.
But these are things to at least think about when exploring some of those avenues. Now, again, back to on track with factoring, when looking at getting into a factoring relationship. Now, prior factoring engagements, agreements, things of that nature, those come into play, especially with the UCC and whatnot. So tell us a little bit about that.
So if you're factored before, the chances are that that other factoring company filed a UCC, which is, they call it a lien. It stands for Unified Commercial Code. It's an acknowledgement to the public that you did business and that they had the right to collect upon your receivables. So without the UCC in place, they're not able to factor you. When you come to us, for instance, and you've had another company in the past and maybe you factored, all we want to do is make sure that you have a release letter, everything was cleared up fine, and that we can move ahead with you. We don't want to get into a sticky situation where you may have used the same MC number but changed the name of the company, and we factor one of your loads, we go to call your customer, but they're not able to pay us because they have an assignment letter to the old factoring company referencing that MC number. And so that's where things kind of cross over and become a little bit gray. That's why we need to clear up old factoring companies and make sure that there's going to be no fight over who's factoring what.
And that's pretty universal.
Definitely.
We've seen that across the board. Now, what about other liens? You mentioned UCC being labeled as a lien. Now, what about other liens that could inhibit the arrangement?
So if you've been in business for a long time, sometimes there would be a lien filed against your company. Perhaps you have a driver who feels that they were owed more than they were due. They filed a lien and it somehow went into collections and now it's filed upon your company. Some states, those can affect whether or not you're able to factor. And generally, we can look those up and figure out pretty quick whether or not that's going to be an issue for your company. Most liens expire within 10 years, so it's back in the history. It's usually not a concern. There are things like federal tax liens or state tax liens that we also look at, but all of those have expiration parameters as well.
Okay.
And sometimes we're able to enter into agreements with the state or with the IRS that allows us to work with you while also working around that lien. But it's purely situational, and I wouldn't say that if you know you have a lien, it's a barrier to getting any kind of financing.
Right. That makes sense. Now, MCAs have been a little more prominent over the years. We actually have a whole nother segment on that. We'll put a link to that with this as well. But tell us about coming up against MCAs.
So MCA stands for a Merchant Cash Advance. It's a company that purchases your future receivables. So they look at your bank account and they see, oh, you consistently get $1,000 a week, we can give you a loan based upon that income, and we'll just take that little bit out of your bank account every single time. So that becomes a problem with factoring because they can be very aggressive in their collection methods. So
that's putting it lightly.
What they will do is if you miss one payment on your loan to them, they will take everything out of your bank account. And then usually that's not enough to pay back what's owed. So they'll start going after different collateral. The easiest thing to do is to go after your invoices that are still out there waiting to be paid. And it creates a whole lot of confusion for your customers. They don't know who to pay. They have a letter from us saying we're the factoring company. They have a demand letter from who you got your cash advance from. And because they don't know who to pay, they just won't pay. They'll say, settle it yourselves and come back to us when you have a solution.
You got it all figured out.
When you got it all figured out. And that's why they can put you out of business. That's why we don't like to get involved with them.
Yeah, and understandably. And again, pretty much across the board, I know everyone's going to be a little bit different, but when it comes to MCAs or business cash advances is what they are sometimes referred to as, it's pretty normal when it comes to a factoring situation just because of how much they can drive a wedge in there.
Right.
Now, what about bankruptcies? I hear people come up and say, you know, I've had a bankruptcy or I'm in the middle of one. Is that going to infringe on my setup process?
Right, so bankruptcy and personal credit kind of go hand in hand. They're not as big of a problem as you would think they are. As a factoring company, you know, we recognize that our clients are needing cash flow, so we don't expect them to have, 800 credit scores. We're realistic. People who need cash flow generally don't have those kind of credit scores. It's not a big deal. Same with bankruptcy. If it's not open, if it's discharged and it was in your past, then it's totally fine. The only thing we're going to look for is maybe if there was another factoring company out there that perhaps didn't get paid out with the bankruptcy, and then you would just be working on that on the side and would verify it, and it would be fine.
So like you said, it kind of goes hand in hand with the, your credit score or your general credit.
Right.
So it seems like the long and short of it is, for a lot of these things that we're talking about on the table here is just communicating, being upfront about it.
Definitely.
We've been able to work through a lot of these situations in very strategic and alternative ways. And as you mentioned, I've been here coming up on a decade, and things are way different than when I started even.
Absolutely.
From risk to how we develop a positive outcome for these guys, just because that's what we want to see. We want to see these guys on the road running fluidly and utilizing our services to maximum value.
Right. And we're so much more than a factoring company.
Yeah.
The extra lengths we go to try and help people get started, it's really amazing.
Very good. Our head underwriter here, Ashley Collins, thank you very much. Make sure you check out our links for the other videos and stay tuned for more. Thank you very much. Rich with Steelhead Factoring.